talking about dead zone running backs, and those are running backs going in the 3rd to 6th round. So TJ, you want to talk a little bit about what dead zone strategy and how you're approaching it this year?
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, dead zone is a little bit of a misdirection there. I mean, you see it, and you kind of think I should be avoiding running backs at all costs in those rounds, and to an extent that's been true. But really, it's more of a praise of wide receivers going in that range than it really is a knock on running backs. And a lot of the dead zone discussion has been birthed from best ball, so it doesn't always translate perfectly to redraft, obviously, because in best ball we have no in-season management, where in redraft we can make up for our mistakes through trades and waiver wires. But the data does kind of help us give us a really good idea of how we should be constructing our rosters in terms of draft and where the most value is coming from. So a lot of this has come from old PPR best ball data. We've kind of shifted to a half PPR as our standard, both here at 4for4 and just kind of the bigger sites across the industry. But even with half PPR data, some of these dead zone ideas have rang true. So if we just look at average points or average points contributed to the team in rounds 1 and 2, running backs just blow away wide receivers. In rounds 3 through 6, we've seen wide receivers really jump out ahead of running backs, and then in the other single digit rounds 7 through 9, it kind of evens out. Going back to best ball, if we look at things like team advance rates or win rates, kind of the same thing. Positive win rates for the collective of running backs in the first 2 rounds, negative win rates for wide receivers in those first 2 rounds, and then it flips in rounds 3 through 6. And if we look at things such as league winners, again, I'm just going to use best ball as a primer here, those players that have had advance rates 10% over expectation, those are just like the top, call it 10 or 15 players over the last 2 years. Again, just using underdog best ball mania. We've seen in rounds 3 through 6, 0 running backs have hit that league winning threshold in that 3 through 6 range, where we've seen 8 wide receivers in that range. And going back to the first couple of rounds, we've seen dominant running backs come out of the first couple of rounds. And it kind of makes sense if we're thinking about how we're projecting running backs. Right now we have 12 to 14 15 running backs going in the first 2 rounds. So we get these huge runs on running backs in the first 2 rounds, and then teams still want to fill out their running back roster, right? So we end up with these guys that, sure, we can. It's usually because we can project them for good volume if they're going in this 3 through 6 range, top 24 running backs. But they usually have a couple things working against them, whether it be age, injuries, bad offenses, and when we have multiple things working against our running backs, usually it tips the scales in that we want to be loading up on those wide receivers in that range. And John, you did your rankings review a couple of weeks ago, and you noted in the wide receiver article, wide receivers so deep, and it has been for so many years, that if we are able to nail down our running back in the first couple of rounds, or 2 running backs even in the first couple of rounds, then we can really just hammer wide receiver and come away with a beautiful looking team. Now, all that said, we should be adjusting this year by year. We should really be taking a note of what we think is going to happen in the year upcoming, not the years past. And I actually do think that this is a year where that quote-unquote dead zone actually does have a lot of fruit to bear. And this should all be fluid on how we're drafting, right? If we come away with, say, no running backs in the first couple of rounds, and for whatever reason, and you aren't somebody that is comfortable with a 0 running back team, by all means, draft running backs in these rounds, but I think we have to be extra diligent in deciding which running backs we really want to take stands on in these rounds. Whereas in the first couple of rounds, like, you could fall into some league winners at the position. In these middle rounds, it's tougher because, like I said, there's just so many question marks with so many of these guys.
That was a good outline of the dead zone approach and why it's called the dead zone. I kind of first heard the term coined from the Zero RB folks, and they tell you not to draft anybody in this range. And yeah. I'm not sure that the Zero RB folks should be trusted, so I'm always skeptical about that. So I question everything that they have to say. Getting into this, I think you outlined it pretty well. These are guys that have some warts, and this is true every year. There's the guys going third through sixth round are interesting players, but they have some things working against them, and we'll get into that as we go player by player through these 4 rounds or so. So the thing that I noticed this year though is that these RB2 rankings these players are a little more intriguing to me than they were in years past. There are some players going in the 4th, 5th, 6th round who might see 20 touches a game, and I follow the volume. I follow touches. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but touches and fantasy points correlate pretty heavily.